concerns of humanitarian violations of humanitarian law. Netherlands restricts export of dual-use goods, requires individual inspection of each shipment. Now, the Netherlands was one of the first countries to stop sending parts and things to do with arms to Israel, followed by other countries too. But now they're escalating this even further. And the criticism, and this is something very significant against Israel, by the way, especially seeing as they're having tensions with the United States. Now, the United States didn't reach a level where they said we're going to have a halt or stop arming Israel. Biden, there were reports that he delayed some shipments before. Trump, nothing solid yet. Are there certain things happening that we don't know of? Maybe. But so far, it's still happening. Now, this is affecting Israel heavily. Not from Europe only, but from global countries too. And the criticism internally is increasing. It's increasing with more criticism about Israel turning its own soldiers into war criminals. I mean, this has been obvious for the ones who can see, you know, anyone with a brain, right? With an ounce of brain and a pair of eyes. Okay, and let's also say with access to internet, if you're, you know, a citizen of the world, that has been monitoring the genocide since the beginning. But for an IDF chief of staff to say that, and to say that repeatedly, an ex-IDF chief of staff, Bogi Ya'alon was one of the first people in Israel to call what Israel is doing ethnic cleansing. Bogi Ya'alon was considered to be right in Israel, right wing. When he came to power and when he became a top figure in the Israeli security establishment, people were worried. But now he's considered to be like a traitor. Lots of pressure was applied on him to take back some of his statements, especially after Israel started what it called at the time the general's plan in North Gaza. Do you remember when they were besieging everything, besieging the Kamal Udwan hospital, eventually imprisoning, kidnapping Kamal Hussam Abu Safiya, the manager of that hospital, after killing his son, applying so much pressure on him? He said at the time Israel is conducting ethnic cleansing in Gaza. But now he's having more statements. So he's not taking his statements back. Now he's saying it does not stop an illegal order. The chief of staff, he's criticizing the current chief of staff, saying he does not stop an illegal order, turns his soldiers into war criminals. The former chief of staff and defense minister addressed the expansion of the operation in Gaza in an interview with Ynet and attacked Zamir, who's the current IDF chief of staff, saying that he needs to stand firm and not allow war crimes under the auspices of Smotrich and Ben Gvir. According to him, this is clearly an illegal order, and every commander and soldier must decide whether to carry it out or refuse. Or Netanyahu, he added, it's taking time. The end of the war, the end of the term. Now, these statements coming from such a senior figure who led the Israeli army and was the defense minister before in Israel, are very serious. And they are heard by the people who serve. This has a very big effect because some of these people that Israel sends to go and fight, many of them like just graduated, not fully trained even, and then sent to die as cannon fodder for a genocidal supremacist entity. Many of them, you know, pushed into pressure, you know, don't think too much, ignorance, brainwashing, but they will see statements like that. You will hear statements coming from the previous IDF chief of staff. They will talk to people who were in the army, And they're giving a backwind. These people are giving so much support for outright refusal. That's already ripe in Israel. It's at peak levels, more than ever before. Over 50% refusing to serve. Now, it's not stopping with Bogi Ya'alon. Amos Yadlin, right? He was the previous head of the Aman, or the Military Intelligence Directorate. He's seeing what's happening with Donald Trump and the American administration, and he's not really seeing that in a positive way. Now, mind you, some people are trying to downplay it. Some people are taking it very seriously. There was an understanding between every Israeli prime minister and every American president. It's a give and take, and you need to learn by the hint. As a matter of fact, the previous Israeli prime minister, Ehud Olmert, was blamed by many in Israel for being a yes man for George Bush at the time when they expanded their war in Lebanon, what was called the Second Lebanese War. And according to many analysts at the time, that move that came from Israel was actually a US interest to apply pressure on Iran through Lebanon. Now, that also failed. There was an inquiry at the time, and it concluded that Israel failed in the Second Lebanese War. But the leadership in Israel, it understands that the communication and the relationship between any Israeli leader and the United States president is a give and take. You can't go all out against an American president, even if you think you have a lobby and you have power and you have influence and you have whatever it is you think you have. You can't do that. Now, according to Amos Yadlin, who was, again, the previous head of the Israeli Aman, he's saying that Trump is actually pushing for a huge move and Israel is left alone with the troubles. And according to this analysis that many share in Israel, politicians and people in the military establishment too, well, he's going to have a deal with Iran, he's going to have a deal with Saudi Arabia, he's going to have a deal with anyone else in the region, but Israel's going to be left out. Israel's going to be left out. And as a matter of fact, the other side is asking him to exclude Israel. And guess what? It's actually working. It's working because it just worked with Yemen. Yemen stopped the United States attacks. That's a victory for Yemen. Yemen managed to stop the United States from attacking them because of their consistent attacks against the US terror forces in the Red Sea, going to support a genocidal entity against a poor country trying to impose an embargo and stop a genocide, for the sake of stopping a genocide, by the way. When all of the other countries are just looking and crying and, oh, aid and whatever. No, Yemen was actually doing something that was effective. Effective to a level where it dragged 5 aircraft carriers of the United States that, guess what, failed. Miserably failed. Shows you that what? Trump is having deals with other countries. It's not just a theory. He had deals. They were taken aback in Israel. They were shocked. Why? Because this whole operation started for the sake of a genocidal entity, for the sake of Israel. It was started because they were targeting Israel. They were blocking the ships that are linked to Israel, imposing a very effective embargo. And they led to the main port in south of the Israeli entity to declare bankruptcy, the port of Eilat. Israel started to try and find different routes, help from this, help from that. It did not make up for the losses. It didn't make up for the losses that Israel suffered. And guess what? Yemen is not stopping the attacks. Yemen today again targeted the Ben Gurion airport with sirens in many parts of Israel panic all across the country, and Israel confirming that THAAD failed again for the second time in 1 week. So, missile from Yemen triggers air raid sirens, disrupt air traffic in Israel. Israel claimed that it intercepted the missile. However, the damage was done without it landing. Look at the airport. People running, everything canceled, people running away from the beach. The missile even disrupted people swimming. Is anyone going to sympathize? Does anyone sympathize with Yemen ruining the people going to the beach? I wonder. Now, shows you that what? Shows you that Yemen has been and still is very effective. And guess what? They're continuing to attack Israel, despite the fact that they had an agreement with the United States, meaning they were excluded. Israel was excluded. Benjamin Netanyahu is isolated, and Yemen managed to isolate Netanyahu, split him from Donald Trump through constant and effective attacks on the genocide entity and on the genocide-supporting U.S. terror forces in the Red Sea. They managed to stop that very effectively, and they are attacking Israel constantly. And guess what? They had multiple statements as well. Today, one of the people who made statements is Muhammad al-Bukhaiti. Muhammad al-Bukhaiti, who was a senior figure in Ansarullah, he said, guess what? We are actually continuing the attacks, and we are in a new phase. We're in a new phase of attacks against Israel. He said the air blockade is now taking another step. We're continuing to conduct these attacks, but this time without the United States participating in any sort of action against Yemen. And millions of people who are out in Yemen today celebrating these successful attacks from Yemen against Israel, but also celebrating the fact that the United States is out of the picture now. That's very important, because if the United States is out of the picture, that means Yemen is at more liberty to conduct even more attacks without anyone hindering them. No one is affecting Yemen now. They're continuing these attacks, and the United States is out of the equation. There's no one to bother them. And that's it. They can't do anything about it. Now, the people who are out in their millions in Yemen and in Iran, they're monitoring the whole thing. In Iran, they are monitoring everything that's happening with Yemen, with Israel, and they're also, having digs. They're having digs at the failure of the THAAD, again, in Israel. I had read this report here. Israel's US-made THAAD fails again as Yemen targets key airport with a hypersonic missile. Now, why is the THAAD failing so miserably? This is a very important question. The United States sent the THAAD system, air defense system, to support, to bolster Israel's air defenses, yet it's proving to be ineffective. As a matter of fact, it even failed in a joint operation with Arrow 3. Why and why is Iran monitoring? Iran is monitoring because Yemen is using new advanced missiles with very interesting capabilities. So let's say, for example, Arrow, it's an exo-atmospheric system and also with hypersonic capabilities. It will detect things that are coming from outside of the atmosphere from really far away so that they can take them down outside of the Israeli airspace. The problem is Yemen's missiles, you know what they do? So they launch a hypersonic missile, supposed to leave the atmosphere. Some of their hypersonic missiles leave the atmosphere, right? And then when the warhead that has its own motor gets released, it starts gliding. It starts going in the atmosphere and above the atmosphere and left and right, therefore making it more difficult for the Arrow 3, which is, again, detects things above the atmosphere. It makes it more difficult to detect it and to take it down. Now, they take these routes and they start, swimming basically, or like a snake, towards Nevatim base or, any of the other targets. Arrow 3 is confused. Hold on a second. We detected a missile coming from Yemen. Where is it going? Oh, it came under the atmosphere. So they detected something, but then it disappeared and it's moving like a snake. Motors, of course, controlling everything. And then when it arrives, it either lands in its entirety, or if it has multiple warheads, it releases them. And by that time, too late. Job is done. Iran is monitoring that very heavily because Iran is, of course, is a supporter of Yemen. And of course, despite the fact that Yemen had many advancements internally in their missile capabilities, there's undeniably Iranian support, and they're proud of their support. They're proud of their support, and also Yemen is showing them these maneuvering capabilities that they're conducting. And Iran also, they don't need to prove themselves because they already proved themselves with, especially in True Promise 2. Now, it isn't only Iran monitoring Yemen, it is the world monitoring India and Pakistan and what's happening between India and Pakistan. Now, the situation between India and Pakistan is still ongoing. It hasn't been resolved yet, but there have been significant developments and interesting reports. Number one, there's an emergency room between India and Pakistan. That emergency room is active. So both sides are talking about the escalation that's happening between them. So they haven't cut ties completely. From a Pakistani perspective, although India wanted to end this operation, this Sindoor operation that they had immediately after it began, by saying that this was a very small attack and we did not attack any military bases of Pakistan, trying to kind of deflect or, cancel any sort of attack repercussion that might come from Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, they had a very quick response, very sharp and quick response. Now, there are very interesting things happening in the responses. Of course, firstly, there was the air battle that happened between the two countries, between the Indian Air Force and the Pakistani Air Force. Now, the Indian Air Force, it uses the French Rafales, whereas the Pakistani Air Force is using the J-10s, the same J-10s that Egypt bought recently, with slight modifications here and there. The main thing about these J-10s is the fact that they have air-to-air capabilities. Now, the fact that the J-10s are taking down the Rafales, the French Rafales, that is a very big indication about the superiority of the Chinese Air Force. And the whole world is monitoring what both sides are doing. So there was this report here in the Eurasian Times about the Chinese celebrating the success of the J-10C fighters. And there were multiple reports. Listen, some reports said they took down 2, some said they took down 1, right? But what's for sure is we've had evidence from the ground these fighter jets fell, the French fighter jets, and Pakistan confirmed that. Now, how did they take them down? Pakistan is going to have down multiple Indian fighter jets using its Chinese origin J-10C. Again, the same one that Egypt received from China too, with capabilities to take down F-16s, the same F-16s that Israel has. armed with long-range air-to-air missiles. This is the key thing here. The long-range air-to-air missile with a longer range than the French Rafale and even the F-16. Now, the Rafale, it's a 4.5 generation fighter jets. It's a very advanced fighter jets. But this is causing a lot of problems for the French manufacturers, because some countries are now evaluating and weighing in buying the Chinese J-10C or buying the French Rafale. So by the looks of it, they're not going to be choosing the Rafale if the J-10C is taking it down. And that's giving China a boost. And that's showing a greater capability from the Chinese fighter jets. But it wasn't only the fighter jets. There was the battle of the drones. And that battle of the drones was extremely interesting. Why? Because India was using Israeli drones. Yes, you've heard that right. We had this report here in the Times of Israel. The Pakistan military said it shot 25 Israeli-made drones. Israeli-made. How are they taking them down so quickly and so effectively? Well, apart from the fact that they have good fighter jets, they have good air defense systems. So this report in Israel again, confirming Pakistan armed forces said to have so far shot down 25 Israeli-made Harop drones. Debris of the Israeli-made Harop drones is being recovered from various areas in Pakistan. This is very interesting. But it wasn't just Israel sending India drones. There was another country sending Pakistan drones. And who's that country? That country is none other than Turkey. Turkey sent many of its drones to Pakistan. And the problem is that this attack was very effective. That was very problematic for India. So we had this report here in the India Express. Let me bring it to you in a sec, saying that 300 to 400 drones targeted the Indian locations from Leh to Sir Creek, says the government. MEA press conference today. A swarm of 300 to 400 drones targeted Indian locations from Leh to Sir Creek in overnight strikes, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri said, underlining that Pakistan was using civil airlines as a shield. Pakistan declared that they stopped closed their airspace. India on Friday said that Pakistan attempted drone incursions in 36 locations, 300 to 400. Pakistan also attacked a Gurdwara, they said, leading to casualties on the Indian side. Now, all of these drones were Turkish. They were Turkish drones. And according to multiple reports, both from India and from Pakistan too, they were very effective. And Turkey was the first country to call Pakistan outright directly and tell them, we have your back, we support you. And Israel was one of few countries to side with India and tell them that we support your right to self-defense. Of course, self-defense. I mean, Modi and Netanyahu are very close. And when Israel says a country has a right to self-defense, when they're just, doing all sorts of, crimes against humanity and all sorts of barbarism in Gaza. It says a lot, doesn't it? But what's really important here, what actually got my attention, is the fact that you have, well, a battle between Israeli and Turkish drones in the in the Pakistani-Indian conflict, and a battle between Chinese and French manufacturing. And so far, it looks like, well, the Chinese, they have an advancement, taking down these French Rafales, especially due to the long-range air-to-air missiles that the J-10C is equipped with. And in the drone game, well, in terms of quantity and quality, Pakistan is outnumbering the attacks by a very long shot. And of course, everyone is monitoring this. This will have a lot of effects, especially in relation to countries who were thinking of using something. This will give a boost to both the Chinese side and to the Turkish side too.